another interesting session on retrograde, I would like to cover the impact of Venus on a male's chart, that is retrograde Venus on a male's chart, and we'll take a look at the female chart also, but primarily a female chart. Why would I say that? Venus is called Shukra, or Shukra means the semen too. So in a male's chart, Venus also denotes the female or the spouse or the partner. So in a male's chart, the position of Venus, be it in terms of house, be it in terms of its other positions like being Digbali, being retrograde, being exalted, all would matter to the extent of matrimony also, a huge extent. And the kind of spouse a person is going to get, all these things would definitely have an effect on the Venus's position, would be affected rather by Venus's position. So this particular position of Venus of being retrograde, this particular ability or this particular stance of Venus being retrograde in a male's chart goes a long way in defining his sexuality, his preferences towards his other half or the spouse. So here Venus, as we see, is retrograde. Now Venus gets Digbali in the 4th house. What is the 4th house? The 4th house is emotions, because the 4th house represents in the natural zodiac Cancer, which is emotions. 4th house is fluidity. There's nothing more abstract or more fluid than emotions in the abstract world. The 4th house is also about conjugal bliss. So Venus herein makes a double entry, because conjugal bliss is one of the very, very strong aspects of a partnership in terms of personal partnerships. So Venus holds a long sway over the partner in the male's chart. If Venus is retrograde, Venus has a different impact. Now Venus rules the 2nd and the 7th house of the natural zodiac. What does the 2nd and the 7th house imply? The 2nd house implies your net worth. The 7th house implies the net worth of the person in terms of how he interacts with the other people, what he is with others, how others perceive him. When this Venus is retrograde, it would go on to stand as to how he is perceived by himself, and it is a different form of being perceived. He himself perceives that feeling that he has is all through himself. And when I use the word perceive, I mean it is a unidirectional truth. It is something that it is not even a truth. It is something that he sees it from his point of view or her point of view. But more so because it's a male that we are considering here when we're talking about retrograde Venus. How does this male take into account of his being retrograde? The female in his chart being retrograde, or the Venus in his chart being retrograde, or the semen or the emotions all being retrograde in his chart. He has a very different impact on his life by this retrograde Venus as compared to what a direct Venus would have in a person's life. Venus is that quality that attracts a male to a female, because Venus is also attraction. As I said, it is all fluid emotions and all abstract when it is coming to attractions and things like that. So when it is retrograde, it has a different impact. How so? It could make the person more than necessary lustful, desirous of the opposite gender, as we will see in Warren Beatty's case. It could make the person absolutely frigid, or it could take the person to another level of becoming gay. So we have 3 options available here. that can be worked out by this retrograde Venus. Let's take a good look at the examples that the retrograde Venus has to offer to us. For starters, let's take Richard Dean Anderson. Richard Dean Anderson is an American actor. He's a producer and he began his television career in 1976. He played Dr. Jeff Weber and he moved into a good height and at the top of his career. But much of his life he has spent with no permanent address. As a vagabond, he does not want to settle down. He dates women in the style to compete with Warren Beatty, but has never married. He has openly admitted to having a problem of settling down. Let's take a look at his chart. Now, Venus, which is his Lagna Lord, representing the self, is retrograde in the ninth house of tradition. Traditionally, a man puts in roots. He doesn't feel the desire to do so. Traditionally, ninth house of legality of marriage. He's not married, doesn't want to be married. Ninth house is all about the ability to sustain something. He has just till date, as per him, he has just been in love with his daughter. So this is one example where we see that this is a person he has not been able to set roots, and he's not apologetic about it. He just does not want to set roots. And we would see that Venus here is with the fourth lord of home, that is Sun, and Venus here is also with Jupiter. When retrograde Venus is aspected by Jupiter or Mars, the thing kind of gets a little more detrimental. Let's not also forget that the depositor in this chart of Venus is Saturn, which in turn is also retrograde. Now let me get back to one clue. In one of my first videos, I remember saying that Venus, when there are 3 retrograde planets in a person's chart, this person would aspire to reach the top. This person has been able to achieve quite a lot in life just by his own dint. So this is how retrograde Venus has unfolded, has in front of his life, has flowered for him, given him a very vagabond kind of a life with a lifestyle to match. Let's take a look at the second chart to follow. The second chart to follow is that of Hugo Black. He was an American jurist and he was called a militant humanist. Why so? Because he, in his career spanning for 34 years, all the data that I get is from Wikipedia or Astro Data Bank. So in his career, which spanned for 34 years, he has got so many opinions and he's passed so many laws which seem and are the protector of individual liberty. He was hyperactive, he was an opportunistic, he had a sarcastic tongue, and he was very self-righteous, very sentimental. But he was a people's lawyer, and he made a mark, and he took it upon himself personally to make sure that justice was delivered to the common man. And many times he's taken up cases against big corporations himself. So he was a public man, a people's person. Let's come to a very interesting fact. It's not something that one would want to sensationalize, but this is something that is just way too different to go unnoticed. When he was 71, he married his 49-year-old secretary. And pre-Viagra, he injected himself daily with testosterone. If for those who do not know, testosterone is the male hormonal drug. Now this gentleman here has Venus retrograde in the 4th house. 4th house is of masses. 4th house, so he would be doing something different. In spite of being a lawyer, a jurist with such a high position, he could have easily got away with not doing so much for the public. He did. Because Venus is retrograde in the 4th house of public, it was something probably due to the public on his regard. Venus here is retrograde again in the 4th house of emotions. He was very emotional. Venus is retrograde in with the 10th Lord, Sun. So again we see that it is his career that reflects it all. Finally, Venus is retrograde in the house of bed pleasures also. For those who do not know, fourth house also is bed pleasure. He was a very stellar personality, so I would not like to comment further. We can all deduce a lot from that. And let's go ahead with the third example, Warren Beatty. This is one of my best examples because while I was working on this chart and many other charts as such, I had done a little bit of research on progression, which is a beautiful aspect of Western astrology, and found that there is a huge change that Warren Beatty has after his marriage. And that was a result of progression. That was when Venus turns direct in his chart. But that is for some other class, some other date, or probably a very in-depth session. Now let's take a good look at Warren Beatty's chart, and this is a place where Venus gets retrograde in the 8th house. We know 8th house is all about sex and scandals. It is all about the life, the area of spouse, your conjugal bliss also. Warren Beatty's dates, or the ladies who he has had as a partner, is kind of a who's who list of Hollywood ladies. It's been written as such in Wikipedia that it tantamounts to the little black diary, telephone diary of Hollywood. But much to his credit, he's never discussed his affairs with any ladies on screen, off screen, never ever on any media. He was a strikingly handsome person in his heydays and even now. And he has been nominated for 14 Oscars. And his love life has been on the print, on the media, speculated. Never first-hand information, but speculated enough to color the pages. However, in 1992, he has been married to the actress Annette Bening, and since then he's been a householder, had 4 children. The turning of his into an reformed rake, rather, from a rake to a reformed rake to a person who's settled well into household life, is due to progression, as I said earlier. But that, again, as I said earlier, is a tale for another time. It's a beautiful tale to be discussed. This chart that we see, Venus is retrograde in the 8th house. Venus showed an aggression, an overindulgence in a sexual life. And we will see that it is by progression that we know how he has been domesticated. There's been absolutely no aspect in Venus. There's absolutely no aspect from Jupiter, from Mars, any such planet on this Venus. So that alone can answer to a lot of questions as to how he finally settled down into domestic. Let's move on to a chart of Gianni Vercase. Who was Gianni Vercase? Gianni Vercase was an Italian fashion designer. He put himself on a pedestal that was so tall that the very few could make it to his height. There was so much that he branched out into, be it jewelry, be it eyewear, be it wall tiles. He did a lot, and his ready to wear couture was very, very famous the world over. A deviation for him was that he met his partner Antonio D'Amico, who was a model, in 1982, and their relationship lasted till Versace's murder. As per Wikipedia, before his death, Versace was diagnosed with cancer in the year, and during that time, D'Amico worked as a designer for the company, and he went on to become the head designer for Istante and Versus Sports. Versace's will left D'Amico with a lifelong pension of 50 million lire, which is amounting to rather to dollars, $26,000 per month, and the right to live in any of Versace's home in Italy and United States. But all this was contested in the court, and only a fraction of it was available to D'Amico by Versace's family, but that's another matter. But we see here that Versace was an homosexual. Not that it has, I repeat, this is not my verdict over it. Neither do I state anything, hold any judgment. Either ways, is something that does come up and it does reflect in the chart. And and all this will reflect in the chart only if, I repeat, only if the other factors also hold true. Just because a Venus is retrograde in the chart would not mean that the person would have to be homosexual or extremely libidinous or extremely infidel, or for a lady frigid or something like that. Other factors should also contribute. In a chart, no factors exists in isolation. There are a number of factors working for a person in the chart, and we should be able to gather all the data together to come to a conclusion. In this case, it's very apparent that he was. Venus, the lord of the 8th house, is retrograde in the Lagna, and she also happens to be the Lagna lord. Here, the 8th house is occupied by Rahu. So there are scandals, there is a different aspect of sexuality involved here. As I have told you before, if Jupiter is with Venus, aspects Venus, or Mars does the same, then sexuality of the person concerned is definitely going to be altered with a retrograde Venus. It makes the retrograde Venus somewhat more detrimental in terms of the physical aspect of a man's life, conjugal life. So we see this in Gianni's chart. So finally, let's take the case of Renée Zellweger. She is an American Oscar-winning actress, and she has made her breakthrough in Hollywood with the movie called Jerry Maguire, and in that her romantic interest was Tom Cruise. Well, and then she has Bridget Jones's Diary to her own, giving her the Academy Awards in terms of American awards that she had desired. So all in all, she was set. However, coming to her love life, she had her name linked to romantically to many celebrities like Jack White and Damon Rice. She remained single until her marriage to Kenny Chesney. But it did not make it to the 6-month anniversary also. They filed for an annulment. Annulment being the key word here, on September 14, 2005. So this speaks volumes about the love life of the lady. And here we see that Venus is retrograde in the 8th house. It's exalted in the 8th house because here the Lagna is the Leo Lagna, and Venus being exalted in the 8th house with Rahu, and this Venus is retrograde. It is also aspected by the 8th lord, which again is retrograde, and it is Jupiter. So no saying as to what this Venus and this Jupiter and Rahu have done to her love life, to her sexual life. With this, I come to conclusion about the effect of retrograde planets on sexuality of men and women both. But there's so much more on retrograde to come. Stay tuned and we'll keep getting more and more. Write in your reviews, every one bit counts. Thank you so much.